I'm Alexander, and this week's build log will be of a 1/35 scale Japanese Type 5 Chiri tank. In this video, I'll go through the build, modifications, painting, weathering, and making a simple base. Without further ado, let's get into the video. First off, I was inspired for this build about a year ago to try and use some of the techniques shown by Martin Kovac. The specific video can be found in the top right of your screen. Surprisingly, I actually had the same kit all the way back from my first AMPS show, so I thought it was a good excuse to dust off the kit. The kit is from Fine Molds and Tamiya, which includes metal gun barrels, photo-etch parts, and individual plastic track links. The build was mostly out of the box, with some improvements to the kit details. The panel lines where the welds would be added were scribed out using a straight edge and dental picks. Then, a mix of Tamiya putty, lacquer thinner, and extra thin cement was applied to the thick panels. The texture was smoother than expected, so for the cast parts I used a thicker ratio to add more contrast. The flame cuts were added using a hobby knife, and looking back, adding the flame cuts results in the most significant improvement of all the modifications I performed. After everything was added, I filled in the panel lines with weld beads made from Tamiya epoxy putty. This was also done for smaller details that were welded onto the tank. I'm not sold with this technique and plan to practice more or try other weld bead techniques. The tracks were built in 2 evenings, one clipping and sanding the links off the sprue, and the other assembling. These were only 2 parts per track, so assembly was quick and painless. The finished tracks were surprisingly strong, and more importantly, highly flexible and posable. Here you can see some different angles of the assembled model from above and below. Damage was added to the fenders using a lighter and a pair of pliers to deform them. Also, the exhaust mesh was dented with a toothpick. The model was then primed black, followed by a base coat of Vallejo IJA chrome yellow mixed with Middlestone. This resulted in a greenish yellow that I liked. The wheels also had their edges painted German grey at this point. White was then added to the base coat mixture for the pre-chipping layer. This was then followed with German grey within the bounds of the lighter layer. Both layers were applied with a brush for more control than using a sponge. I spent about 40 hours on this, and the results are worth it in my opinion, as this is the best chipping I have done to date. A pin wash was applied with a dark brown oil paint to bring out all the details. This made the flame cuts easily visible. The tools were also painted with oils, and then the metal sections were chipped as well. Tracks were airbrushed black, grey, and various rust shades. This was followed by a dry brush of German grey where the surfaces are constantly rubbed clean. Finally, the exhaust was painted with Vallejo rust paints and some pigments to add texture. Vallejo mud effects were used on the lower hull. It is important to do this before adding the wheels, as you have better access to all the nooks. The color was then tweaked with IJA earth, with some light dusting over the upper panels as well. Sadly, I broke my first airbrush when adding earth brown, but I found a frog on my way in from the workshop. The base was from a cork pot holder with some carved styrofoam. I primed it to stop all the foam dust balls from going everywhere, and then proceeded to add some fine gravel and super thin epoxy putty to the edges for strength. This was painted, and 12mm stacked grass was applied. Gluing the model to the base was a little sketchy, but the clamps were required to ensure that the tank was not floating on top of the grass. Finally, some yellow wildflowers were added for more interest. And here is the finished build. I'm quite happy with the result, and think it is the best executed model I have built to date. Overall, the kit is high quality and enjoyable. You can find products used in the description below. In the future, I hope to get more video footage of the building and painting process, as the camera seemed to focus on my hands rather than the model. With that being said, thanks for watching and see you soon.